Welcome back to the second part of the GIMP tutorial. In the first one we learned how to cut out a person. I know there was no video recording of me. I had to update my software in order to get it. And I'm just using Ice Cream Recorder. But what we did in the first one was cut out an image, cut out a person out of a photograph. This is me. By using our free select tool. It looks like a lasso right here in GIMP, and just you could spread out your cut points a little further on the straight lines and make sure you get them a little closer together on the curvy areas. But that's what we did in the first video. So now we've got a blank background behind our cutout because we saved it as a new image. And in this video we're going to go over implementing that cutout into a new image. So for example, we can post it. I already recorded this video once and the audio wasn't working, but basically this is what I ended up doing, cartoonizing it a little bit. Actually, I oilified it. It's one of the filters in GIMP, and added it in here, cut out some of the grass, and then pasted that layer on top. But instead of doing that, we're going to go ahead and add it to another image I have here of me in 2005 or 6. I was I was burning crap in Iraq, something we had to do. But what I wanted to do was use this image to show you how we can easily add another layer with our cutout person. Over here on the right you'll see we've only got one layer. This is your layers explorer basically. What we want to do, there's a number of ways to do it. You can use GIMP itself and go down to File, Open as Layers, and select the image you want to add. But in this case, we're just going to drag and drop this in here. Boom! And you can see it's a lot bigger compared to the photo. So using our Move tool here, we're just going to slide this over a little bit. It's going to be like future me looking at past me. Now we need to shrink this layer down because it's obviously far too big, and as far as perspective goes in a two-dimensional image, the smaller it is, the further away it appears. So what we want to do is shrink this down. Instead of having it right on top of the camera, we can go to our layer menu here, go down to the scale layer option, click on that, and this link button is closed. If you open it, that means you can do different width, disproportional to the height. But if you leave it locked, then you can change, say, the height. We see up here 604 by 453 is our image that we dropped in. So obviously we don't want it as tall as the image or taller. What we'll try to do maybe is just shrink it by like 2/3. So it divides 631 by 3 and you've got 200 and change. We'll just go with 200, click in our width window, and it'll automatically adjust, keep the proportions. Go ahead and scale it, and you can see we're just about the same size as this guy now. And that's good if you want to put him, behind him a little bit. Roughly the same size once again, so that's pretty good. The boots look a little bigger than the shoes. There's a couple of other things that don't seem exactly right. But we can fix that. So what we'll do is we'll just put him standing here, and we'll take into consideration shading. It seems to be a fairly cloudy day, so we don't have exactly one point of sunlight, a sun source, if you will, where there's casting immense shadows or anything. It looks slightly as though from the Humvee here that the sun is pretty much directly overhead, which is good because then we could just put a perspective to our layer here. Now over in your layer viewer, if you click on the bottom layer, you'll get rid of the lines around this one, and it'll give you a better idea of what it'll look like. So what we want to do is, it looks like there may be a slight shadow behind him. So what we're going to go ahead and do is put a light drop shadow in under Filters, Light and Shadow, Drop Shadow. And it doesn't look like the offset as much. Maybe we'll just go slightly to the right here. No Y offset. Y is your up and down, X is your left and right. Blur radius, we're going to keep that minimal to about maybe 5. That's how far out it'll blur your shadow. And the opacity is how transparent or how see-through the shadow is. So 60 is generally a good starting point. Go ahead and drop that in there, and as you can see, it gave us a bit of a thicker shadow than we probably wanted. We kind of just want to outline the character, so there's a couple ways to get rid of that. As you can see, it added its own layer. So if we were to hide the layer we just had in, you'll see nothing but a shadow left. But we can either go to Edit, Undo, or we can just right-click on that layer and say Delete. We want to click back on our cutout layer. If we're going to give them any kind of shadow like that, we want to do it really light. So I just went to Filters, Reshow, Drop Shadow. And what we're going to do with our blur radius is just leave that at 1. And hopefully that'll give us a very mild outline. Go ahead and add that in. And because this is not a very high resolution photo, it still looks like it's a little bit too much of a shadow. So again, Edit, Undo, Drop Shadow, Filters, Reshow, Drop Shadow, and we'll just get rid of the offset altogether and just leave a blur radius, and maybe drop this down to 50 for the opacity. Okay, so now that just gives us a hint of a shadow. The best way to see it is to actually zoom in. Obviously it's pretty pixelized because this is not real high resolution photo, but you can see there's just a hint of a shadow behind him now. And look at it better, get rid of your lines if you click on the bottom layer. Okay, so you know what? I think that's good. We'll go ahead and take our layer here, and let's get rid of these lines so it's easier to see in context. If you right click on the layer, you can actually go down to Layer to Image Size, and that's going to bring your lines all the way out. Go ahead and do that. That way we don't have to keep transitioning back and forth. Now one more thing we might want to consider is a perspective shadow just below him. That's basically a shadow based on the angle of the light source, so it may or may not actually be relevant in this photo, but we'll give it a shot. As you can see, there's also a lot of other filters and options that you can add to modify a photo. We're just going to go over the shadow for now. Let's go ahead and open up the perspective dialog, and your angle is the angle at which your shadow is going to come out from the source, in this case from our person here that we just added. The relative distance to the horizon, that's how far the shadow is going to go out, and the length of the shadow is how tall it'll be. So we're going to want a really small shadow. We'll try 0.1. The blur radius is the same as drop shadow, how far out it'll blur in pixels. The distance to the horizon, we're going to just drop that down to 4. The angle, we're going to want pretty much a 0-degree angle, maybe 0.1. We'll try 1.4. We'll just see what it does. Again, a lot of GIMP is just experimenting with this stuff. Same things Photoshop has. A little bit steeper learning curve, but you can accomplish just about anything with this free software. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to come out as. Okay, and as you can see, what we're going to do is get rid of all these other layers. We're going to use the eye icon to hide it. And from our perspective shadow, we can see if we highlight it, it's just this small area here, and if we zoom in, there's basically nothing there. So zoom back out, and let's try to give it a little bit more oomph. Delete that. Let's bring everything back up. Go up to our cutout person layer, and a lot of this is trial and error, as you can tell, but we're going to go ahead and put this closer to normal settings. I'm going to put this all the way up to 1, and just to give you an idea of what it'll look like, we'll go ahead and put this back to around 40, and there you can see there's a tall shadow dropping off into the distance. That's not what we're going for in this image. So edit, undo, filters, reshow, perspective. Your dialog window may pop up behind. Just click on it to bring it into focus, and what we can see here is that our angle needs to come down. We'll try 5. Our relative distance of the horizon, obviously that affects how far out it's going to go. We're going to set this to 1, and we're going to leave the relative length down to 1. The opacity, it was far too dark. We're going to drop that to about 60. Again, a lot of trial and error. But if we do that, we can see that our shadow now, if we hide everything else and select our shadow layer, zoom it in, we can see that it's very faint, almost non-existent on a 0 plane. So again, delete the layer. We may not even need one in this case. So we'll just go ahead and delete that. Experiment with that. That's good for setting up shadows if you have you know, a fabricated background that you want to use, or like a sunset photo where everybody's shadows are casting off. Your opacity is going to be how dark the shadow is. Just play with that stuff for whatever project you're working on. So I think we'll just stick with the drop shadow for now. It's just a very mild kind of outline to give the effect that he's standing there. You can change the color of the drop shadow. That's something you may want to experiment with as well. So in this case, we'll delete it. I'll show you what that does. Filters, like shadow. Say if we want to give it like a white glow or something like that. Now the offsets, that's another thing to talk about. The blur radius, if you were to bring that up to like 30 pixels and leave the 0 offset for the X and Y axis, you're going to have basically a glow behind whatever you're putting it on. It's really nice for a black background with a green glow. Here's your glow color, or your drop shadow color. We're going to go ahead and just drop in some white. And that's the hexadecimal code for white, all Fs. Black is all zeros. And we're going to leave the same settings as our previous shadow there. So here you can see, if we hide our first layer, we've got a mild white shadow, which kind of makes it stand out a little bit, almost as if there's a glow behind this other one too. Maybe we'll stick with that. Another thing is the sharpness on this cutout that we dropped in. That's a little bit too sharp for the photo, a little too bright. One of the ways we can combat that, again, make sure you have the correct layer selected that you want to work on. You go up to your colors, and you go to hue and saturation, or brightness and contrast. There's a lot of different ways to play with this, you know, to bring your sharpness and brightness down. We're going to want a little bit less brightness and a little bit less contrast. You just kind of play with this meter here, and you can see in the window, the preview window, what it'll look like. So that's playing with the sharpness. Let's go in here and play with the saturation. This is your black and white level, or very vibrant. If we bring the saturation down just a bit, generally that will take care of our brightness. You got lightness to play with, and you've got hue to play with. So different, if you want to turn yourself blue, that's how you do it. I think what we'll go ahead and do is go with the brightness and contrast. And what we'll do is just bring down the brightness a little bit. Give it a little bit of an older picture feel. And maybe increase the contrast slightly, or decrease the contrast slightly. There we go. Okay, so we didn't bring it down much, but just that little bit is significant enough to kind of give the illusion that this image belongs here. So now you want to title your image, possibly. We'll go ahead and click on the A here for your text tool. Here's your colors: foreground color, background color. You can swap these out by clicking the little arrows. Select what color text you want to put in here. You can do something that is complementary to your theme. We've got a lot of browns, tans, reds, orange, yellow, a little bit of green. Those would kind of complement the scene. Or you can do something contrasting, which is, you know, will stand out a little better. So let's play with some text real quick. We'll put something in and say a red will contrast significantly, actually, because we get a bright red here. So let's select bright red for our text. Here we can select the type of font we want to use. It's up to you to determine what type of font you're going to put in your image. Just keep in mind readability. If it's a crazy font, it's going to be hard for people to read. So maybe choose something that's got bigger letters or more traditional style letters. A lot of people use impact for headlines or mono. I think it's mono bold or mono space bold. That's a popular one. We're just going to go ahead and go with something readable, but a little bit different. Let me just pick one of these. Gentium Basic Bold. Your size, keep in mind the pixelation, the size of your image. We're going to start with like 40 pixels and see how that looks. Here's your justification: left, right, center, and justified. We're going to center our text. If we leave the box dynamic, it'll move as we type. Here's our letter spacing. We'll just leave those to default settings until we get something in here. So now let's put, you just click to start your text box and then start typing. GIMP tutorial part 2. And then we'll put a colon, and maybe down here we'll put reflection, or adding cutout to image. Alright, so there's our text. We can adjust the size over here by clicking up and down. If we want it bigger, smaller. 37 looks pretty good. We can also move our whole text by using this alignment tool. We can click on the text and use this auto alignment feature here, align it to the center. We can actually move it up and down if it's a bigger photo, but these two arrows pointing at each other, that's good for center alignment. Go back to your text tool if we want to modify what we wrote. Click in there. This red is pretty bright. One way to combat that, Control A, or adjust it, I'm sorry. You click on your color selector over here under the fonts. Say you want to darken it up a little bit, you got your sliders here. So we're going to slide this over a bit. Just find something that we're comfortable with. It can be fairly dark. I'm going to show you how to bring it out in a minute. Okay, so now we've got a darker text in there. It looks a little better. We might want to adjust the spacing a little bit for the letters. We can just do this here. That improves the readability when you adjust the spacing like that. Click on our alignment tool again, recenter it. Click on our text tool, click it back in the box, and you can modify the fonts any way you want. Your text, I mean. You got your line spacing tool here. If we want to shrink the spacing between the two lines, we can do that. And now let's say we want to bevel this, make it stand out a little bit more. One way to do that: filters, decor, add bevel. And now this is actually going to put us on a new window once we do this. But we're going to do a really thin bevel, 1 pixel. Select OK. Here comes your new window. And as you can see, the text is raised slightly, where it gives the impression that it's rounded, three-dimensional. So if you want to keep that, you can literally just discard the other one because we haven't saved anything yet. And what we're going to do at this point is go ahead and File, Save As, save our project as a GIMP project. And we're going to put that in our directory here, GIMP Tutorials. And we're going to call this GIMP 2. Save the project. Alright, now you'll see up here if there's an asterisk, it needs to be saved. That's about it. I'll go ahead and real quick just show you the glow. As you can see, we still got our text highlighted. Go up here to Filters, Light and Shadow, Drop Shadow, and I'm going to show you the glow effect real quick. We're just going to do about 10 pixels. This is going to be a pretty bright glow. And this is going to get added behind the text. Now, if you want to really see it, hide your back layer, bring it back, hide your text layer, and you can see it's real faint there because we have it about 50% opacity. But that'll help your letters stand out a little bit. You may want to use black, you may want to use green, whatever color you choose. Go with your creative license and figure out what works for you. Okay, well that's about it for this tutorial. We got a lot more to get into. Got some pretty cool background effects to show you that we can do with cutouts or with other images. If you're just creating a logo and you want some crazy looking background, or working with shapes, that can get a little bit more tricky. So stick around and we'll do another episode very shortly. Thanks for watching.